Hi, good afternoon. My name's Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do on Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. to figure out the advances and where smart buildings and smart building technologies is going. Glad that you're able to join us today. If you're wondering who we are listed on mondaylive.org. A point to note that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind. Please do post questions and comments on the Zoom chat to make this as interactive as possible. This slide deck is also available right there on the homepage of mondaylive.org if you want any of the links or any of the information we're sharing. So this being February, we have been talking about OT, or operational technology. This is the last session on OT. Our agenda for today is our normal news and trends chit chat. And then we want to talk about OT, specifically how OT is different in different building types, different verticals, as it were, and let's see where that discussion takes us. Before we sort of go into these our normal slides, little sort of programming notes. We've actually been doing a lot of planning, believe it or not. Normally we go sort of almost week to week, but now we're doing this month on OT in February, and next month, which will start next week, we're going to be, our theme is going to be IoT. So we're going to be uncovering IoT, obviously in the context of buildings, and see where that takes us. And then that will lead to April, when our theme is going to be AI. So we're going to wrap up all of this OT conversations and IoT conversation, and then we'll sort of progress it to discussing how AI fits into all of this. So really looking forward to this sort of sequence of themes.
That's just a bunch of letters: OT, IoT, AI.
Yes, indeed, just a bunch of letters. Okay.
BIS, BMS.
Yeah,
indeed.
iChart.
The other thing that we're going to start to do next week, we'll see how well this goes, and we'll sort of experiment with this, is that we're going to create a new segment that we're going to call Spotlight. And really the idea here is that we'll give 15 minutes and for somebody to talk about an experience or use or an application of some of the concepts that we've been talking about on Monday Live. This is a list of some of them: Stack, the 2525, Cloud Native, IBB, and others. So we want to do that, and obviously we'll get this panel to do that, but we also want to open it up to other people that may have some interesting stories about their experiences in using some of these concepts, just sort of to bring that up to discussion. So reach out to us, reach out to any one of us, and we'll figure out how to get back to you and bring you on if the story is great. So looking forward to this starting next week. Not quite sure who's going to start this, but one of the people on the screen will do this next week. So with that, hand it over to Ken.
Thanks,
Ken.
Lots going on here. I think I just wanted to finish up a conversation we started last week when we talked about the CDO, and I think we were calling him the Chief Data Officer. He's evolved to be the Chief Digitalization Officer now. Another article from Nicholas talking about how that meshes with artificial intelligence. So I think that'll be good to carry into our conversation that we're moving forward on. The other big message I wanted to carry out to everyone is just the power of these short videos. We're all busy. We're all running real quick. But we all somehow find time to go to Zoom meetings and team meetings, and by accident or whatever, every once in a while we say something that is actually astoundingly wise. And if we have someone who can actually recognize that and pull that out as a clip and put it on social media or put it on automated buildings, I think it helps our global cause a lot, because it actually sometimes just summarizes a whole concept of what we're dealing with, and it puts it inside of the context of the Zoom meeting and stuff. So this came up at our anniversary. We had Brian Collins come up and just tell us the power of short video, and I love his joke. Is I asked him how short is short, and he says, well, it's like a skirt. It's got to be short enough to be interesting, but long enough to cover it. And I thought that was a good way of presenting it. And so you can actually see his presentation inside of our anniversary presentation. And I think that's what short video does very quickly, is put something fairly complex into context. So anyway, I would like you all to consider using it more, ever how you want to use it in a LinkedIn post. It's fairly easy to do once you figure it out. It generates a little URL, and you can put that URL in any kind of social media or even an email. So you start sharing words rather than sharing. You start sharing words and pictures rather than just writing an email.
Sorry,
Sorry?
just to expand on that, and I think, yeah, this is, I mean, everybody's going down this direction on all the YouTube now has their shorts, right, version, right? Which is whatever it is, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and Insta and all the others, of course, will have their short content models. Are you saying that you'd have a repository of this, or we should just?
No, I think it's just a new way of communicating.
Okay.
I think it's like if you're trying to get a point across with one of your clients or
Yeah.
everything, and you've had somebody has done a particularly good job that's stuck in your mind, go back and get that, pull it out. The clips are easy to make, and you can make them as long.
Yeah.
Don't make them too long, but you actually can throw them into the situation that you bringing this piece of information from. And I think it's just a quicker way of doing stuff, and a more interesting way. And who knows, they might find the whole conversation, because the clip always, because it's pulling from the actual YouTube clip, it's you can just watch the whole thing. So I think that's useful as well. And the only other one I want to do before closing is my section is the journey from automated to autonomous buildings is another one. Brian's come on as a great supporter of automated buildings, and he's a good marketer, and one of his goals is to try and teach us as an industry how to market. And I think he's doing a good job. So watch what he's doing. But that's a big message there. He basically has an interview with the Passive Logic folks. And I think that is a journey we all are on, is the autonomous car is there, and the autonomous building is inevitable. How we get there, we're still working out the details, but I think ultimately that might be one of our months in the future of Monday Live. I'll politic for it anyway. Anyway, lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, we did a whole month on autonomous buildings. I think back in last year or the year before.
Yeah, it might have been might have been too early, too late kind of thing. I think the trouble with that is it's evolving pretty quick. It's probably worth bringing back up again. And all of these technologies are like that. That's we get a big something comes out and it gives us an industry shift. We kind of focus on it for a few months and then we leave it alone, and then we come back to it and it's completely changed. All of our technologies are evolving. Maybe it's just I'm getting old and having a hard time keeping up. Just one.
But that's the idea of doing these spotlights, so that we do that if possible every week, and to just remind us and everybody else what we've done before and the tools that we've created. So
and hence just doing them as 5 minutes, right? Into 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, I think the short video could be a big part of that. Forward is if you got, I think you said 15 minutes, but I think you meant 5 minutes. So you've got 5
Right.
minutes, but maybe 1 minute of that is a video clip.
Ken,
Back-
just quick question on automated buildings. Do you have a YouTube channel?
Nope,
Might consider getting one.
nope. No, not because you don't understand our model. Our model is, we are a library. We link to other people's YouTube.
Okay,
Your library, we tell, so all of our AHR is on the Cochrane YouTube channel.
Mhm.
Basically, the ones that Brian posted are on his channel. If Tritium is sharing stuff with us, it should be on the Tritium channel. And when you go there, then it's like you've switched libraries. You've actually gone to your channel. So I would throw that right back to you. If
Mhm.
your company should have their
yeah,
YouTube.
we do have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's it, like,
yeah.
there's no value in me repeating what is done,
Mhm.
and is done much better than I would do it. So
Mhm.
I will never have a YouTube channel.
But
Okay.
but I'd like to say you're both showing your age because it should be on TikTok, man. Come on.
Thanks, Dan.
No, each is their
Okay.
place.
No,
We're now.
All
on
right, let's move on.
TikTok.
Let's
We're
move on
now
to it.
TikTok.
So on back to the slides, I saw these two. I don't think that the dates are actually the same, but I saw both of these are kind of related. One is on the left talking about the IoT revolution, and the right on the edge, the rise on edge, but they're both on Forbes. Both come from Forbes. So I just thought it's interesting, the IoT revolution, just kind of an interesting way of looking at IoT and edge, not from the way we typically talk about it, but obviously from a Forbes perspective, which is sort of more financial and business oriented. So you may want to check out those two links.
It's quite recent too, isn't it? Enter that one.
Yeah, this one is in January.
Yeah.
And this one is December of last year, so sort of a month apart.
Yeah. Yeah, that I did read the January one. That's actually a very compelling article, by the way.
Yeah, neither of these mention smart buildings per se in the way that we talk about it, but it mentions obviously peripheral sort of subjects such as energy and smart cities and other things. So again, that's another thing that I tend to watch and see.
Yep.
Rick is not feeling well today, so he's not here with us. But wanted to give an update on C4SB, DIF 2525. That project's moving along fine. As you know, we did an update on that at AHR with the 1.1 framework. The IBB project is going very well. We're meeting now once a week again, and the focus right now on the IBB project is towards RILCOM that's coming up in June, which will be the sort of the next big outing for the IBB project. And one of the things that sort of came out of the IBB projects is this sort of notions that connections that the IBB create are essentially business reasons to do something, and which is really sort of a business use cases. And in C4SB, there's a sort of a project that's been initiated to start to catalog the interesting use cases that we can possibly sort of implement in the IBB. So this is brand new. It's only started about last week, so just look out for that. There's a lot of outreach going on, follow up from AHR. Rick and I were in Berkeley last Friday giving an update to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs on IBB, and they really like what they heard. Sort of lots of exciting stuff that we anticipate there. And again, plans. I think we just sort of make sure that we understand what's going on the C4SB side of things. The summit video is there, the highlights there, and we should be able to give an update on the Realcomm outing next week, because we have some meetings with Realcomm this week. So hopefully we'll have some more specifics on that when we come back in next week. In our normal link board. And pause for any other thoughts.
Yes. Fred Gordy sent out a link from the Hacker News. CISA uncovered a state agency where the system administrators' user credentials had been compromised, and they were able to get into quite a lot of the systems, including the backend Azure system.
Well,
And the reason I wanted to point it out is system administration is a very important but often overlooked function within any organization, particularly in our world as opposed to IT. But this was in an IT arena. But basically, when the employee left the company, they left with their system admin credentials still existing, and that's fundamentally how the hacker got the credentials. But a well administered system, when an employee leaves, that same day their credentials should automatically be removed. My experience within the OT world is it's the opposite, right? And so it's not really, it's a policy procedure. It's not necessarily a technical one. The article does point out, however, with the recent emergence of multi-factor authentication, that even if you forgot to remove the person's credentials, and they were discovered, if multi-factor has been enabled, then that nothing bad would have happened. Okay, so there are a couple approaches, but the point I want to make is system administration is a often overlooked and understaffed function, but it really, at a policy level, it just means you have to identify a person who's responsible for it and make sure that they're the ones who stay close to whoever's working for the organization or has access as a third party. But so it can be done in a very manual way, but somebody has to be assigned and given that responsibility.
yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Steve. And our systems are actually tied through Okta to our back ends. So as employees are, if the employee is terminated or released or whatever, and it's a one-stop deletion of their account for everything, and including
Right.
our systems are tied.
Yeah, like through Active Directory. So if
Yeah,
everything's tied into a common
yeah.
Active Directory or something analogous to that, then you
Yeah.
have that ability, as you point out.
But I was going to kind of echo your point. Even with all the technologies and things that you can do, and even with multi-factor, to your point, having someone dedicated to it and being and we have one guy, and I kind of equate him to the CFO. His answer is no to everything first, before.
Yeah, right.
And he has to be of that mindset, right?
Right. Yep.
The other side of this is, we're all being pushed to do multi-factor, which is a good thing. It's also an annoying thing to have to do if you've not done it before.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that you don't do it, but just acknowledging that you have to go through that, and there is a reason why multi-factor is really important in zero trust.
Well, I think in my case, you only have to have one or two times where you get an email to say, hey, here's your credentials for some site. And I go, hang on, that wasn't me. That, to me, I'm fully convert to multi-factor on everything. That's critical to me. I don't sign up on anything on the critical sites, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of others, but yeah, you only have to have one or two cases where you get the email to say, here's your authentication code. And you go, hang on, that wasn't me.
There's actually a term, 2FA fatigue, where it's just too many times and too many things. But this is where, if it's a large organization like Anos, they have a single sign-on, I would assume, for most things, which enable all of that.
Yeah, it does.
All right. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, so talking about OT and talking about different types of buildings, and we put together this list. I'm going to put it up. And again, like last week, the list of different types of systems, different type of OT systems. This is not necessarily complete. There's missing stuff, and obviously the granularity is all different. But the point is that just sort of to have a discussion about the fact that these different building types are obviously operated differently, and sort of the question that I kind of would like to keep in the back of our minds while we're going through this, and I'll come back to this, is, you know, we know buildings are different, right? Because we know a school is different from an airport, or you could take any two of the list I had previous. The question that is kind of curious to me is that how different is really the OT in those two different operations? Because clearly some of the things are very different, but some of the things are exactly the same. An IP packet is the same, and you know, some of the sort of networking stuff is the same. So I just sort of to add a bit sort of color on this discussion, thought we keep that in the back of our mind to see.
So I think there's really
Comparison.
two parts to the equation, right, Anto? And since we're in the process of doing acronyms, I could even go one step further and call it OTT, right? There's the operational technology, and then there's the operational technology application stuff, right? So, you know, from our perspective, for example, simple example, occupancy sensors, because you're talking about the packets and the networking, but you can actually go down all the way down to the sensor types, right? So you could use occupancy sensors in a school application, which will have a different OT application to an airport, which is still using the same sensors. I could use the same fundamental IoT or OT sensors, you know, or even temperature sensors in the BAS, right? I'm using the same fundamental underlying technologies, measuring temperature, right, in the school to an airport, but I could have multiple different use cases for that OT technology. So it's really about the use cases, to me, is the differentiation than the technology itself.
I'd like to chip in on that. One of the key differentiators that we see going maybe one step beyond what you're saying, is whether there are on-premise IT assets like servers and or resources like IT people versus buildings that don't have that. You know, they have some kind of router and internet service, and they might not have any other servers per se, especially tied to a building system, right? Big difference in how you connect, communicate, security between those two things. So, you know, we do a lot of work in restaurants, for instance. Rarely servers, or certainly not IT people on staff there. Quite often no IT people specifically on the team, hardly. You know, there might be one central resource for a franchisee, likely outsourced is the best case scenario. Whereas, you know, bigger commercial buildings, there's often IT people, you know, kind of on-prem, so to speak, as well as servers and applications running on those servers, per what you were saying.
So that, and I agree with you, so that comes down to, at the end of the day, the use case doesn't change. It's the ability to execute the use case, right? And what's the technologies available to execute the use cases? Because I know this is a future subject, because you could argue then that there are good, solid OT technologies that have been around for decades and decades and decades, you know, that all the big four have been executing, that works really, really well in an airport, you know, and that's part of their application, but doesn't work well in a small, you know, single building school.
Yeah, and it comes, maybe this is what you were referring to with applications. Like in HVAC, it's the type of system that you have that sort of dictates the type of controls that you need. And in what we see in our market, there's this big old gray area crossover group that can go either way. Like
Right.
a big box retail, technically could be all thermostat control, right? Because might have 20 RTUs on the top of it, but an RTU can run from thermostat and remote sensor pretty easily.
Right.
We've talked about that before. But very commonly, they will have a more sophisticated automation system deployed on those buildings, right? That require a server and connection and so forth. So,
And this is kind of why, and I don't know if we talked about it on the Mondays, if I was there or not, but this is why I think we've done a disservice to the term OT, right? Because at the end of the day, OT exists in everything, every building, every type of every type of application. That list that you brought up, Anto, before, OT exists in every one of those, right? Even the small single, gas station with a rooftop unit, it has inherent in it a whole bunch of OT. And part of my, my message is OT's been around for a long time. We've been doing OT in all sorts, even if it is as simple as a single standalone thermostat, non-communicating to a rooftop unit. That's still operational technology, right? To execute. Now, how do we get, can we get better access to it? Can we get better use of that? What else can we do with that? But from a context of OT technologies, we've been doing it for years, and we just, I don't think we've really leveraged the fact that a lot of what this panel does and a lot of our guests do is a lot of experience and expertise in OT, whether that is as simple as, making a simple standalone thermostat work with a rooftop unit all the way up to the most complex BAS system with integration, data transfers, and all the other bits and pieces. That's a wide spectrum of stuff that we get involved with. And again, I don't think we've really marketed the value of the concept of OT.
I agree completely, And in fact, I remember a couple of years ago, McKinsey came out with a study showing all of the new IoT and nodes there would be out there. And I came back with the retort that, well, it turns out that a lot of the ones that are going to be out there are already out there, right? So it's a mature industry. We've been doing this for years. The growth due to the lowering of cost of microprocessors and communication technology allows it to spread out. But at zeroth order, we've covered the stuff so far that needs to be covered. And going to Anto's next diagram, I think the key here is, as both you and Tracy mentioned, it's one scale. So the difference between the school and the airport is numbers of points, right? School maybe 10,000 points. Airports, hundreds of thousands, 500,000 points. And why that's key is that in order to scale technologies out, you really need different technologies at those different scales. That's why Tracy has basically worked on his niche and developed a robust offering for that scale. And that's why the big players have very robust architectures and integration methodologies on these very large projects.
Yep,
I agree.
Yeah, and then back to your point, Jim. The fun part is whether it's the superintendent or the electrician or whoever's running that school, weirdly enough, has the same desires for the type of use cases that the airport wants to do. Right? He wants to know when it's open and closed. He wants to know when the lights are on. He wants to know how many kids are in the school. He wants to know how much electricity he's using. His fundamental use cases aren't really different, right? And to your point, Jim, the big difference is just the scalability of it, and hence what techs you use to do that. But they're all trying to solve similar problems. Now, granted, airports have got some additional things. Well, in fact, I was going to say they've got additional things like security, but what we're plowing into security in schools these days is probably on par with airports, with metal detectors and all sorts.
Anto, I'm sorry. I wanted to highlight your new acronym, OTT. I love that. Because that's exactly, we've always been talking about OT, but we've been talking about OTT, the technology underneath the operating. I think that's a really good, important point. So I think when somebody is talking about OT, you need to clarify, are you talking about OT or are you talking about the complete package, the OTT? Or are you just
Right.
talking about the last T?
Which kind of melds together Jim's comments and mine, right? If it's just OT, we've been doing OT for decades, right? If it's just operational stuff. But as Jim points out, the technology has changed, cheaper, more, easy to deploy, et cetera, et cetera. So is it really about the OTT?
But isn't that change, the sort of significance of that change related to information? Is that sort of the
Yeah,
big difference?
that's-
Is that we're now
yeah.
looking at OT from an information perspective?
Yes, I agree. Meaning
So-
that if we go back to the simple temperature control model,
Right.
Controlling temperature on a rooftop unit, whether you do it with a dumb thermostat or a smart thermostat or a IoT thermostat, which is the use case is controlling the temperature. But what we're really now talking about is tell me all about that. What's going on, where it's at, what it's doing, who's doing it.
Yeah, so you could actually describe that as information OT, which is IoT. That gets confusing. Sorry.
I'm seeing this evolving to OTT.
With AI, Ken, so we'll throw an AI in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to the list, and I know people on the panel here have different sort of experiences with these sort of different building types, different verticals. Anybody want to dig into one or two? Sort of expand the conversation that we've been having? You're talking, Mark, but you're muted.
Here we go.
We heard
So
that loud and
what-
clear.
Yes, one thing I want to say is this, again, just to go back just for a second, Anna was talking about use cases and stuff. But I want to throw in this, again, ultimately, OT or OTT, whatever you want to call it, ultimately is technologies. And to your point, we've been doing it for years. And what we're not talking about is outcomes. In other words, if you look at this list of buildings, I would argue there are some outcomes that are similar, i.e. maybe temperature, comfort control, or whatever. But there are other outcomes depending on the type of building and the type of business or businesses that are housed within these different type of things. So now to lead into, let's just use convenience stores. That one popped up. All right, we got temperature. Great. I got lighting. Great. But then look at the other pieces, the other systems that are being OT controlled through technology today. You have refrigeration, you have freezers, you have the gas in the pumps or the petrol in the pumps. You have the fire suppression system, at least to get a warning if something's going to happen out in the pump. And a well-known, no names mentioned, is they have their ovens that when they cook food connected to the systems or whatever. So their outcomes are different than that of, let's say, a single office or possibly a hotel or hospitality. They may have other things, like, for example, when you check into the hotels now, part of that is, like, one I would frequent all the time, is they already know my temperature, how I want my room, like an icebox. And they've got my son on the TV. Welcome, Mark. Glad you're back. This is your 115th day staying with us over the last 5 years or whatever the case is. So that's kind of where I'm going, guys. It's outcome use case, but essentially OT technology, plural, is the same to your point. And we've been doing it for years.
It's one thing, listening to Tracy talk about different, I think it's Tracy or Steve talking about different applications for different use cases. And now listening to you, Mark, sort of the way to actually do this, we had a lot more time as actually to do a smarter stack for each one. Because then you would have the outcomes at the top line, which is the purpose. right? It will be different because the purpose of a school is different than a purpose for airport. You get that right there in the very first line of the stat.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a commonality for every one of these facilities you're talking about in terms of HVAC is a general need, right? So but when you dive into HVAC, there's a wide range of how that's accomplished mechanically and electrically, and that drives a range of OT technologies that are appropriate for that technology. So you've got that to consider as well, guys. But common to any type of building is HVAC is lighting. And then after that, and I would say fire and life safety, because it's pretty hard to have any building today that can be open to the public that doesn't have a fire and life safety system in it. But after that, then it's going to be driven by what Mark was suggesting is what are the use cases that building is catering to. So it's very different in a convenience store versus a grammar school, certainly versus the pharmaceutical life science research facility. So in each case, you've got a whole very different sandbox, if you will, of use cases that need to be addressed. But I do think, regardless, the technologies themselves are, I would argue, are pretty much all there from a siloed perspective. The question what we've been talking about a lot is okay, each of those individual siloed component pieces, parts, how well do they work together? And that's, that I don't think that's the purpose of today's call. So I'll stay away from that one.
Do you think, Steve, just out of interest, has use cases changed? Is there another dimension to use case? And I'd call it time. I see some use cases just lately have started to pop up where the client it's just a short-term objective. And when I say short-term, like they want to do something for like the next 12 months or 2 years. It's no longer 10, 15, 20 year use cases. We've got the 10, 15 year use cases, right?
Sure.
Controlling temperature for the next 10 years is an absolute use case. But I've started to see some time dimensions to it too now, which is causing us to rethink how we solution that as well.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Isn't there another delimiter in here, which is whether the facility is a critical structure?
Yeah.
And basically it cannot stop. So all right, the OS and the OT and those following T's are much more critical on critical structures such as hospitals, possibly some military ones. Whereas a school, it causes an inconvenience, but if we get it fixed in an hour or we get it fixed in a day, nobody dies. So, I remember my experience working on OR rooms is anytime you work on an OR room, anything you do is got to have a backup for the backup, and it's got to have not only that, it needs a trailing technology to make it all work. So
plus auditing and histories and all that stuff that goes with that.
And how is the short-term thing due to kind of coming off of COVID, where everybody's now only taking short-term leases as opposed to the longer-term leases on buildings, and therefore you see a lot more churn on people moving?
I see a little bit of that, Roger, but the other dimension is that they're trying different things. And I think it's still a post-COVID thing. They're still trying to work out real use cases post-COVID. Yeah. I think that's the other one that's coming up.
Are they treating it more like a pilot as opposed to a full-blown?
Yeah, it's a little bit like
rollout.
That, and I think part of it is, I tend to put my foot down a little bit on pilots because some people will pilot you forever if you don't if you let them. So it's sort of maybe that's what it is. You're right, Steve. Maybe it's more of a legit pilot.
You must, Tracy, you must see a lot of this in retail and restaurants where people are trying out, you
Yeah.
know, areas to see whether they can be successful or not.
They'll pilot you to death, and everybody thinks their systems are unique from the other brand or the guy that owns the same brand down the street. What I was going to chime in, that something that we see that I've never seen in the commercial side of our business, in restaurants in particular, is this whole concept of transportability, meaning in 5 to 7 years, I'm going to tear this building down and build a new one, or completely remodel it to the point where I will gut the entire inside. And we want, you know, a system that we can kind of take out and move down the street, or, you know, we're going to move literally in the convenience store. It's southwest corner to the northeast corner. You know, can we move our system over when we build a new
That's
building?
interesting.
So that's a use case is probably a little bit unique to that industry just because of the way they do their buildings. But that in that industry, the idea, you know, of building a restaurant, and that's the restaurant forever. And QSRs in particular, and national branded QSRs, or you know, even regionally branded QSRs to some degree, that's not the thinking anymore. These buildings are 7-year buildings kind of things, and then they're changing them out. So
I wonder if that's,
Hotel's
sorry.
been a bit like that because they just lease everything in the building, and they can, you know, one day it's moved from a Hilton to a Marriott or something else. But the other thing, where it's happening elsewhere in the world is actually manufacturing, where people are building factories where they no longer think the factory is going to be in China or Thailand or Vietnam or whatever, just so they can move it on to wherever the lowest cost base is to manufacture. But they want the key, you know, lines and equipment, but the building and the people are not the functional part of it. They just want to lift the whole thing and move it to a different place.
we have a customer who is in the gas business for HVAC, for AC units, you know, R410 or whatever it might be. And they've changed their whole manufacturing philosophy. They're actually building their manufacturing for producing this kind of refabricated coolant, if you will, to be totally contained inside of a container.
Huh.
They move the container to, you know, they sell the containers to regions around the world so that they can produce locally and cut down on transportation costs and risks.
Data centers do that too.
Yeah, that's kind of the extreme of what you're saying, I think, actually.
Yeah.
Different use case.
So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing flexibility as being kind of a core of sort of moving forward, because anticipating that things will change, and we're not no longer sort of creating things for 20 or 30 year life cycle. And the other thing I'm hearing, which interestingly aligns with what the project that I, on behalf of Rick, was mentioning that the coalition is starting, which is trying to uncover all of the use cases, which is because everywhere we go on this discussion so far, it's all about use cases. So interesting sort of alignment with flexibility,
Yeah.
which is also another subject we've talked about many times.
Maybe one way to look at this, Anto, is behind all of this, there are some common trends, right? I think, for instance, a common trend in strategic planning is the window is much shorter than it used to be, right? We used to write 5 to 7 year plans. Now, if you go beyond 3 years, especially in our industry, it's almost useless, right? So that's in the short-term nature. The flexibility, the mobility side of it is something that we never really dealt with, and buildings are more reconfigurable these days than they've ever been, right? So there's some mega trends, if you will, or high-level trends that are seeping into our industry in some of this stuff. I think that we could probably easily identify 3 or 5 of those that really make a difference. in
I
this whole.
do think the COVID thing, that's another offshoot that came out of the COVID, right? Because at the end,
Yep.
at the beginning of COVID, we all thought, oh, this is just a blip and everything will go back to normal. And the other lesson, same thing, the other takeaway lesson was, yeah, what other events are going to happen that change things fundamentally that don't. So since you can't plan for those, to back to what you're hearing, you know, what's flexibility, mobility, you know.
Yep.
And I
options.
think that at the other end, that's kind of enabling the concept of using wireless a lot more as well because of the quick turnover. You know, moving
But
around and installation is minimal.
surely there are equipment or systems that go into a building that can't be done for a 1 or 2 year or 3 year life cycle. I mean, a chiller, for example, or an elevator that goes up and down. And you can't do that. So I'm
They can.
wondering if
I disagree, Jens. I used to work for York, and Caterpillar used to have mobile chillers. They used to rent them out, you know, and they would go to buildings, and it can be done.
Yeah, we've worked with wasn't chillers, but it was for like steam generators and things like that were all on trailers that get moved around.
Yeah.
No different than
So-
generators, right?
the only thing is the same is the concrete and steel and the doors kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's-
the point, the use case is going to vary based on the type of building and the type of occupants.
Yeah.
Right, but the how is the one that's going to vary and evolve. So so just identify the use cases alone is a great exercise, but when you dive into the how, that opens up a whole nother world of options. To say an example of HVAC, how I actually control the HVAC equipment. Does it come in already prepackaged? Is it coming in on a trailer that you guys just mentioned? Or am I putting in the controls that are going to sit there and be hardwired and you know, nailed to the wall that are designed to last for 40 years? So there's a lot of options there that we have to take into account.
I think it's a bit compound, Steve, and I agree with you 100%. I think it's not only the controls, but even the mechanical systems themselves. People are rethinking how they package those, and you know, to make it. And it talks back to, like I say, in the use cases, even in our space, you know, commercial properties. One of the lessons that burned a lot of the large commercial properties was, okay, again with COVID and you know reduced return to office. There's this whole concept, oh, we'll just convert them all into housing, you know, residential housing or units or whatever else. And you go, well, no, the infrastructure is not designed to do
Designed for that, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
to do that infrastructure is not a trivial change out. And there's
Right.
lots of good case studies out there about that today. And so there are thinkings too now about building, and when you're building the buildings, do I need to be flexible, not just on, you know, is it just commercial or do I want to be able to change it out, you know, later on, which is now we're back into the infrastructure, mechanical systems and stuff, you know.
Right.
Okay,
It's
so
interesting.
what do we?
So I was going to
Right.
go, it's interesting now we keep putting back to the smarter stack. You know, you've got Mark talking about the purpose, and you know, we've been talking about the how, Steve, and you know, just when you work through that for each building, it's interesting how you can keep pulling back to that.
So let me ask you guys this. So ultimately, OT, OTT, whatever. Do you think, two questions. Do you think that it adds value, property value to the specific facility or group of facilities in which OTT or OT is playing a role? That's number one. And number two, looking at value from both a intangible value and tangible value. Do you see differences, or what are y'all's thoughts in around that? I say that OT does add value in many ways, both intangible and tangible. Tangible, the most easiest one is that when the owner, in this case, goes to resell that building, she can ask a higher price for that building, of a building that has OT versus one that does not. Or one that has more sophisticated OT versus less OT. So what do you guys think about that?
I think, but that kind of was my opening comments, Mark, about we've never really marketed. We've been doing OT, we've never really marketed the value of OT. And to your point, I think that's a big deal, right? In that, you know, marketing your property, you know, and you've got more sophisticated OTT, which means the actual cost to run and operate that building and to manage it is significantly less than the one next door, because, you know, buildings are now a little bit dime a dozen, so you better have some differentiation. And it's really probably the OT that you've got in there in the first place, right?
Right, and I'm not just meaning the occupancy stuff.
No.
You know, all that, I'm talking, you know, that's of less versus, all right, whatever. And again, case in point, when I was over in Hong Kong several years ago, and I went out with a major property owner who was showing me his different buildings. And we're all driving all along the island. He says, let's get out of the car. We got out and we looked at these two buildings. He says, what do you see differently? So I counted the stories. I counted, they looked the same, roughly 20 stories, whatever. From all appearance from the outside, they looked identical. When did you build it? Same time, everything. He says, I just sold it. One got $5 million more when I sold it. Why? Because it had energy management system, it had OT system or whatever. So he commanded a premium price and he got it.
I think also, Mark, going right back to Anno's story earlier, the talk earlier was talking about, you know, with the single sign-on and everything, it becomes more manageable.
Yeah.
When everything is converged and interoperable, it's, you know, you've got, it's definitely something that's a plus.
I think we should
So-
also point out the ease of transfer. I think that's really significant in the real estate, is that if it is well connected OT and OTT, that makes it much easier for me to take over control of that building if I bought it. I probably would save me years of time.
So
That's a big deal.
just listening to Mark, and I look at the smarter stack, the top of the stack is called purpose. And as we all know, and it is, why is this being done? And my first tendency is to say, why is this being done? Is tell me what your use cases are. And I separate that from value, because you could almost argue that the stack deserves a layer above purpose that talks about value, or some way to express value in the purpose line. What do you think, guys?
Well, how would you express it? Because that, to me, that's what the purpose line is. Because you can put in the purpose line to be profitable. There's nothing wrong with that. That to me indicates value. Are you talking specifically about indicating what?
Yeah, well, the types of things Mark is talking about in terms of the building being worth more. Well, why would it be worth more? Is it less costly to operate it? Is that one reason? Is it because it has greater flexibility for the types of tenants the building can accept because of the nature of the OT technology? I'm just
But
coming up with those are
yeah, but
value
those-
propositions.
But those are things that you would legitimately put on the purpose line. Reduce operating
I think
costs.
maybe I could paraphrase Steve, and I kind of agree with him. Maybe that's the missing piece that we haven't done. I mean, it's easy for us to write use cases that describe a purpose, but unless you attach a value to that purpose, it's kind of a bit of a meaningless use case, right? Or, you know.
Right.
Are you talking about a value as in a number or a value as in a narrative?
Arguably both.
Yeah.
Right,
It'd be good
arguably
to put
both.
some even if the number is percentages, right? Doesn't have to be absolute.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. It's both. And to me, I look at it as what's the business value? Okay, I saved energy. What does that mean from a business perspective? What does that mean? And what are the benefits that I, as an owner, have received? Yes, I reduce my energy spend by 30%, 20%, or whatever it is. And that equates to $200,000 a year. All right, so, but from that business side, you can use more. Anyway, and I think where you're
I
going,
do
Steve,
worry
think you're right.
about, there's the other end of the spectrum, and I'm like you know me, guys, right? I've made every part of my house smart, and every piece of stuff that I've got, I put smart everything, and I think it's great. But I do panic a little bit if I ever go to sell this place. Someone's going to go like, "Holy crap, I can never run this place." You've over-engineered the bloody thing, and is there a use case that your building goes too far to the other end? Like,
Right.
I don't have the people to run the smarts that you put in here. Thanks. Anyway.
So your house becomes one that the purchaser would have to demolish and rebuild.
I probably the amount of smarts in here is beyond me.
You get the smart toilet seat yet, though? That's the question.
Yeah, it's got to the point where my wife would refuse to use it.
Okay, and any other angles on different building types?
I do like the whole thing about the whole flexibility equation, right? How stuff is use cases of buildings. The concept. Now, I think some are obviously going to be set. Hospitals are going to be hospitals. You're not going to repurpose a hospital probably in any time frame. Maybe, well, maybe you could argue.
Never say never.
Never say never, yeah. But just in our area, the local, what are they called? Tom Thumb supermarkets, who bought out another chain, is literally moving. One store has moved its contents to the store, the one that they bought one street down, and the other one is being sold off for a indoor, I don't know, some indoor gaming thing. So yeah, it's kind of weird that the flexibility goes all the way to retail.
Right. Okay. So it's past 4 o'clock here on the East Coast. I think we should start to think about wrapping up. Anybody want to do a summary? Jim or David? You haven't been.
David, you have the floor.
Very
There.
good,
May
Jim.
not be.
Might not be there. Okay. Well,
Oh, I'm here.
go ahead. Go for it. Wrap it up.
Wrap it up. Well, on the asset manager and owner side in commercial real estate, it's typically broken into 4 categories: office, retail, multifamily, and industrial. And when you look at multifamily, that's actually the same as hospitality, and actually pretty close to senior living. So when you look at these categories, the use cases are very similar. But then when you start to look across office to retail to multifamily, you also see a convergence of guest or tenant or campus participant agreement, where your access control badge becomes your ubiquitous way to do everything across the whole development. And then also, ideally, all of your assets are managed by the same team, and all of them are tied together. And so when we look at all of these different opportunities, there's definitely going to be a way to improve the tenant or guest experience, as well as the operations model through this convergence. And from doing this study with a number of different clients, you're going to have a package pickup for your office tenants as well as for your residential tenants. both are going to want access to your fitness center. And we're seeing a convergence of all of these tenant requirements across all of the same assets. The exception, of course, is industrial, but across multifamily, retail, and office, there's definitely a convergence. And all of this is leading towards that. And that's why interoperability and integration and open data standards and exchange are going to be fundamental to all of this happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done, David.
Yeah, great. Thank you, David. Let's wrap this. It's been good conversation today. We'll get a video up the next day or two. And hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye all.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.